In late April of 1887, in Washington Territory, Duncan Rowe nearly drove past the whistle in the rain. One more bend and the buckboard would have carried him beyond the ruined freight shelter, beyond the woman pressed against its broken wall, beyond the baby hidden beneath her shawl. He heard the note only because the near horse stumbled where muddy water had begun eating through the road. Thin, sharp, human. Duncan pulled the team so hard the traces snapped taut. Ahead, the culvert had already failed. Brown water rushed through the gap where planks and packed earth should have been, carrying branches toward the lower road. By dark, no wagon would pass. By midnight, a person caught between the washout and the rising river could drown without ever reaching the riverbank. Duncan climbed down and stood beneath the rain, listening. Nothing came except water striking his hat and the nervous breathing of the horses. Then the whistle sounded again from the shelter. He found her beneath the only piece of roof still holding. The woman had turned her back to the weather and bent herself around the child in her arms. Her dress clung darkly from shoulder to ankle. Mud covered one boot above the laces. She shook from cold, but when she faced him, her chin remained level. "Is the road to Alder Reach open?" she asked. No greeting, no plea, a question with survival inside it. Duncan glanced toward the broken culvert. Not ahead. Can it be crossed on foot? Not with a baby. The bank is giving way. Her eyes moved over him, then past him to the buckboard, the team, the empty road behind. She counted facts before trusting any of them. How far to Alder Reach from here? Too far before dark. Lantern Creek Ranch is 7 miles east. Your ranch? Yes. Beneath the shawl, the baby stirred and gave a weak sound. The woman lowered her face at once, listening to the child's breathing. Her fingers were bare and pale from cold. Duncan remained where he was. Does she have a fever? No. Trouble breathing? No. May I see her face? The woman's shoulders tightened. Rain gathered on her lashes and ran down her cheek. She studied him long enough for the near horse to stamp in the mud. Then she opened the shawl by 2 inches. A round cheek, damp, dark hair, tired eyes. The baby blinked once at him and turned toward her mother's warmth. Duncan looked only as long as he needed. She is chilled. I know. The answer carried no gratitude. Good. He had not asked for any. My name is Duncan Rowe, he said. You can ride in the wagon bed beneath the oilskin. You do not have to sit beside me. The woman looked again toward the flooded road. And if I keep walking? You will reach the washout before dark and go no farther. He did not soften the truth. She pressed her lips together. The baby moved again, restless now. That decided it. Not Duncan, not fear, the child. Alma Keane, she said. This is my daughter, Lottie. Duncan stepped away from the wagon and left the path open. Alma climbed without taking his hand. She settled in the rear corner beneath the oilskin, Lottie protected against her chest, a battered valise wedged beneath her boots. Duncan drove east. He kept the horses to a walk where the road softened and did not turn to question her. Twice the rear wheels slid. Twice Alma braced herself without crying out. On the third jolt, something wooden struck the side of the valise. A small whistle. Duncan heard it beneath the rain and stored the fact without asking. Lantern Creek Ranch appeared near dusk, the house low and dark against wet fields, the barn farther down the yard, the bunkhouse lamps burning beyond it. Alma watched every structure as the wagon rolled in. She noticed the men beneath the bunkhouse awning. She noticed the open barn doors. She noticed the distance back to the road. Duncan noticed her noticing. He stopped beside the barn because it was nearest and climbed down first. Alma descended with Lottie in her arms. Her wet boot slipped on the wagon step, but she caught herself against the wheel before he moved. He had begun to understand that she would ask when she wanted help. Beneath the barn eave, where the rain struck less hard, Alma looked toward the hayloft. Her voice came lower than it had on the road. May we sleep in your barn? Duncan had heard men ask for money, horses, work, credit, and forgiveness. He had never heard anyone ask for so little while holding so much pride together with both hands. The barn is too cold, he said. Her face closed immediately, not anger. Preparation. She had expected refusal and was already arranging herself around it. Duncan reached inside the doorway and took a folded wool blanket from a peg. He held it out without placing it on her. There is a spare room in the house. Alma did not take the blanket. I cannot pay for a room. I did not name a price. There is always a price. Rain drummed over the barn roof. A horse shifted in its stall behind her. Duncan kept the blanket where she could accept it without coming closer. The room has a latch on the inside. I will show you the door and stop at the threshold. At first light, if you choose to leave and the road allows it, I will take you where you want to go. Why? Because the barn is cold. That is not what I asked. No, he waited. Alma's attention moved from his face to the blanket, then back again. She took it herself and wrapped it around Lottie. The baby disappeared into dry wool. Alma's grip eased by a fraction. No one enters that room? Not unless you invite them. Not even you. Especially not me. It was not trust. Nothing so large could be earned in one wet evening, but it was enough for movement. Duncan led her across the yard, staying several steps ahead, so she would never have to wonder whether he meant to guide her by the arm. At the porch, Alma set down the valise to adjust Lottie's blanket. The leather case tipped. A linen-wrapped bundle slid from beneath the flap and struck the boards with the weight and hard sound of iron. Duncan bent by instinct and picked it up. Alma seized it from him. Fast. Her eyes changed before the rest of her face did. Fear, cleaner than the fear she had shown at the washout. Duncan straightened. Through the linen he had felt the shape of worked metal, thick at one end and narrow at the other. Broken, perhaps. He did not ask. He opened the house door instead. The room is down the hall on the left. Alma held the bundle against Lottie's blanket. A man named Phineas Bale may come looking for me. Does he have lawful business here? He will say he does. That was not my question. She met his gaze. No. Duncan nodded once. Then he remains outside. He showed her the room, pointed to the latch, and set a pitcher of water on the floor beyond the threshold. He did not cross it. Alma stood inside with rain-dark hair against her cheeks, the baby in one arm and the linen-wrapped iron in the other. A mother, a child, a broken piece of metal that frightened her more than the storm. Duncan stepped back. I will bring warm water and food. I will leave both outside. Alma's hand closed around the edge of the door. Mr. Rowe, he stopped. If Bale asks, you never saw the iron. Duncan looked once at the bundle, then at her. You have not told me there is iron. The door closed. A second later, the latch settled into place. So the latch remained between them all night. Duncan heard it lift once when Alma crossed the room, then settle again before Lottie began to fuss near dawn. He had left warm water, bread, and a bowl of stew outside the door. By morning the food was gone, but 2 silver coins rested on the washstand. Alma was waiting in the hall with Lottie bundled against her chest and the battered valise upright at her feet. Her dress had dried stiff around the hem. The outer shawl remained damp, and Lottie kept turning her face from the cold wool. The low road is still flooded, Duncan said. Alma closed one hand around the valise handle. It will not dry because I stand indoors. No, it will dry because the rain stopped. Water continued falling from the eaves, though the worst clouds had lifted beyond the hills. The yard was a field of brown mud. How long? She asked. A day, perhaps 2, before a wagon can cross. A horse might manage sooner. Then I will walk. Duncan took the coins from the washstand and held them toward her. You will need these. They are yours. No, I ate your food, I used your fire. Rain is not a debt. The words did not soften her. They made her more watchful. Duncan understood. A person who had learned to search every kindness for its hook did not stop searching, because a stranger claimed there was none. You have 3 choices, he said. Stay here 3 days while the road firms, ride to Alder Reach when a wagon can pass, or wait until travel to Pomeroy is safe, and I will take you there. And after 3 days, you leave if that is what you choose. No charge for the room, no. For the food, no. No work owed, not unless you ask for work and we agree on wages first. Alma watched the coins in his palm. She reached for them. Their fingers touched, briefly. Duncan released the silver at once, leaving it entirely in her hand. She noticed, not the contact itself, the fact that he had not used it to hold her there. Lottie made a tired sound and caught at Alma's collar. Alma freed the cloth from the child's fist. Alder Reach is where Bale's notice will be posted. What notice? The one warning people not to trust me with ferry equipment, or money, or my own child if he thinks the first 2 are not enough. Duncan kept his voice level. What happened at the ferry? Alma carried the coins back into the room, put them in a small leather purse, and tucked it beneath Lottie's blanket. When she returned, the valise remained where she had left it. The linen-wrapped iron was still inside. Duncan knew only because she never let the case out of reach. "My husband ran the South Ferry," she said. "Thomas Keane. He worked it for 6 years before Bale took the lease. Bale kept him on. Thomas knew the current, the cable, the drum, and every bad place along the bank. Bale knew fees. That was the difference between them." Duncan waited. Alma adjusted Lottie to her other arm. 5 months ago, Bale ordered an after-dark crossing. One covered freight wagon. No passengers. Thomas had already warned him the drum hardware needed replacing. What kind of hardware? Pins, retaining pieces. Small iron most men notice only after it fails. Her gaze moved once toward the valise. Bale said the shipment had not reached Alder Reach. Did Thomas believe him? No. Did he refuse the crossing? Alma's mouth tightened. He argued. Bale ordered him to keep the ferry open, and Thomas went. He did the work. The distinction mattered. Duncan did not flatten it into agreement. Alma continued. The drum failed before the platform reached midstream. Thomas freed the team before the wagon dragged the ferry sideways. The driver reached the bank. Her thumb pressed hard into Lottie's blanket. Thomas did not. Duncan could have offered sorrow. The words would have been true and useless. Bale blamed him, he said. Bale said Thomas had neglected the drum. Then he said Thomas had been drinking. Was he? Alma's head came up. No. The answer struck clean and hard. Bale brought me a statement 2 days after the burial. It said Thomas ignored warnings and reported for work unfit. He wanted your signature. He wanted the questions buried beneath a widow's name. You refused? I read it twice. Then I put it back in his hand. What did that cost you? Alma's gaze shifted toward the muddy yard. The ferry cottage, the work, a place on the stage. Bale told merchants I was unstable. He told drivers I might accuse them next. Yesterday, a stage driver left me beside the road after seeing Bale's notice at the Alder Reach post counter. Duncan's jaw tightened, but he did not turn anger into a promise he could not yet keep. Hoofbeats sounded near the gate. A rider stopped without calling out, leaned from the saddle, and fixed a folded paper beneath the latch. Then he rode away. Alma saw him through the window. The color drained from her face, but she did not move behind Duncan. She opened the front door herself. "Stay on the porch," Duncan said. "Advice, not an order. I know the difference." He crossed the mud and returned with the folded notice. Phineas Bale's name filled the bottom in a broad hand. Duncan did not break the seal. He offered it to Alma. She took it, but the damp edge clung to his thumb. Their fingers met again. Duncan let go before she needed to ask. Alma read the notice in the hall. Her expression hardened on the second line. He demands the return of county ferry property. Does he name the property? No. Does he name an officer who ordered its return? No. Then he has sent a demand, not an order. She read the paper again. Men like Bale count on people not knowing the difference. Do you? I learned. The answer carried a price. Duncan did not ask her to explain. He nodded toward the room. Keep the paper. Read it as many times as you need. Why are you leaving? Because it is yours. Duncan stepped onto the porch and shut the door behind him. Through the window he saw Alma read the notice a third time. She did not tear it or throw it into the stove. She placed it inside the valise beside the linen-wrapped iron and fastened both buckles. By the time Duncan returned from checking the culvert road, Alma had carried Lottie to the barn. She stood beside a frayed lead rope hanging from a stall peg, working the damaged fibers between finger and thumb. The tremor that had followed her from the road was gone. Her hands understood this. That line will part under a hard pull, she said. I know. Then why is it still hanging? I cut another length yesterday. The storm came before I finished. Alma studied the sound rope above the fray. This can be shortened and spliced. You know how? She gave him a flat look. A ferry uses rope. So does a ranch. That does not make every rancher good with it. Are you? Good enough to keep a calm horse tied. That was not my question. Duncan almost smiled. No. Alma set Lottie in an empty feed box lined with a folded saddle blanket, close enough to reach. Then she unwound the lead rope and began separating its strands. I will stay 3 days, she said. I will work for what we use. The room is not part of your wages. Then pay me for the rope. If the splice holds, it will. Duncan opened the wall cabinet and searched the iron pin box for a marlinspike. Alma stopped working, her gaze fixed on the smooth clevis pins inside. She lifted one, turned it beneath the barn light, and ran her thumb along the thick neck where strain would gather. Then she looked toward the house, toward the valise that held the object Bale would not name. "Mr. Rowe," she said, "who files a clevis pin thin at the neck?" "No one who wanted the pin to hold," Duncan said. Alma kept the sound clevis pin between her fingers. Its neck was thick where the strain would gather, its shoulder smooth and even. She turned it beneath the barn light, then returned it to the iron box. Thomas said the same. The unfinished lead rope lay across the workbench. Lottie sat in the blanket-lined feed box nearby, tapping her wooden whistle against one knee. Duncan closed the cabinet. "Is that what you carried through the rain?" Alma's hands stopped over the rope. He did not ask where she kept the iron or whether he could search for it. He had asked one question and left room for no. "Yes, will you show me? If I do, it remains mine. It is yours now. Bale says otherwise. Bale says many things from outside my gate." Alma searched his face for impatience. Men often called a question fair when they had already decided the answer belonged to them. Duncan only waited. Patience was not trustworthiness. It was evidence that might one day support trust. "Stay with Lottie," she said. "I will." Alma lifted the child from the feed box and carried her to Duncan before changing her mind. He opened his arms but did not take Lottie until Alma placed her there. The baby caught his shirt and stared up at him with grave suspicion. Duncan settled her against his shoulder. "We understand each other," he said. Lottie struck the whistle against his collarbone. Alma went to the house. Her valise remained where she had left it, buckled beside the guest-room bed. Bale's notice lay inside with her folded dress and the linen bundle beneath it. She carried the case back to the barn, set it on an overturned grain crate, and took Lottie before opening it. Duncan returned the child at once. No lingering, no claim disguised as affection. Alma sat with Lottie against one hip and unfastened the valise. The bundle rested beneath the dress. Thomas had wrapped the iron the night before he died. The linen had once been white. River mud stained one edge, and 5 months of handling had darkened the folds. Alma lifted it out and opened the cloth. Half of a broken clevis pin lay in her palm. It was heavier than it appeared. One end retained an old square shoulder. The other ended in a rough black break. Between them, the neck narrowed in a straight, unnatural groove. Duncan did not reach. "May I?" Alma placed the iron in his open hand. He weighed it, then opened his cabinet and held it beside one of the newer ranch pins without letting the two strike together. The difference was plain. The ranch pin thickened toward the shoulder. Alma's pin had been cut away where it should have been strongest. Duncan ran his thumb above the groove. Filed. Thomas found bright marks near the drum before the accident. Alma touched the dark material pressed into the cut. He believed someone packed pitch over the filing. To hide it? To make the wear look old. River grit sticks to pitch. Duncan studied the rough break. Could the ferry have done this by itself? Water can rust iron. Weight can break it. Neither uses a file. Did Thomas tell Bale? Twice. I heard the second warning. What did Bale say? That the new pieces were delayed in Pomeroy. He said the old pin would carry one more load. Duncan's gaze lifted. The after-dark wagon. Yes. Alma took the broken pin back and folded the linen over it. Thomas wanted the drum closed. Bale wanted the toll. And after Thomas died? Bale's men cleared the platform before daylight. They pulled the wagon harness from the water and dragged the damaged housing onto the bank. I found this below the drum while they were occupied. Did anyone see you? I do not know. Bale suspects you took something. Thomas kept damaged pieces when he thought a man might lie later. Bale knew that. Duncan watched her return the bundle to the valise. A county road officer should examine it. I will choose who sees it. Yes. The answer came without resistance. Alma fastened both buckles. You think Samuel Price will believe me? I think he should see the iron before deciding what he believes. That is not the same promise. No. She respected him more for refusing to make one. Lottie reached toward the valise. Alma moved it beyond her grasp. The child complained. Before Alma could offer the whistle, hoofbeats entered the yard. 3 horses. Duncan stepped away from the workbench as Phineas Bale rode beneath the barn eave. 2 men followed him, both broad-shouldered and silent. Bale wore a dark coat despite the clearing weather. Mud flecked his boots, but his hat and gloves were dry enough to show he had not ridden far in the rain. He looked first at Alma, then at the valise. "Mrs. Keane," he said, "you have made a long road out of a simple matter." Alma rose with Lottie in her arms. "You made it simple when you asked me to sign a lie." Bale dismounted. His riders stayed in their saddles. "Your grievance does not give you the right to steal county property." "Name what I stole." "Ferry hardware, records, whatever Thomas carried off before his neglect killed him." Lottie startled at his voice and pressed her face into Alma's shoulder. Alma held her closer but did not step back. Duncan moved to the barn entrance. He did not stand in front of Alma. He took the position Bale would have to cross to reach her. "You came to my ranch for what purpose?" he asked. "To recover property concealed here. Do you have Samuel Price or another county officer with you?" "I do not need an officer to collect what belongs to my ferry." Duncan turned his head toward Alma. "Does Mr. Bale have permission to enter the barn, the house, or search your belongings?" Bale's expression changed. He had expected one man to answer another. Alma met Duncan's eyes. Duncan faced Bale again. "Then you may leave. You have heard one widow's version. I heard her answer. Search the valise and settle the matter. Return with county authority." Bale stepped nearer. "You shelter stolen property, Rowe, and you share the cost. My ferry is the ordinary crossing for Lantern Creek cattle. I can refuse your stock before sunset." Duncan's face remained still. "Put that in writing. You think paper will keep your herd from losing weight on the North Detour?" "No. I think paper keeps men from forgetting what they threatened." One rider moved his horse forward. Duncan did not reach for a weapon. He planted his boots in the doorway and waited. The horse stopped. Bale pointed at Alma's valise. "You do not know what she carried from the accident." "Neither do you," Alma said. Bale's attention snapped to her. "Grief has made you reckless." Grief did not file iron. Duncan's voice was low, but the words ended the movement in the barn. He called toward the bunkhouse. Evan appeared beneath the awning. "Saddle the bay. Ride to Alder Reach. Ask Samuel Price to come as county road officer, or send word when he can." Bale's mouth flattened. "You involve Price, and Lantern Creek cattle do not touch my ferry." "You said that already," Duncan replied. "Now someone else will hear it." Bale mounted. Before turning his horse, he looked at Alma. "You should have signed the statement. You should have written the truth." His riders followed him into the yard. Alma waited until all 3 horses passed the gate before releasing the breath beneath her ribs. Duncan did not touch her. "The porch boards are slick," he said. He stepped into the mud and offered his forearm. His other hand remained open at his side. Alma could refuse without explanation. She looked toward the road where Bale had disappeared, then at the arm Duncan held steady. Taking help was not the same as yielding. She placed her hand around his forearm. Damp wool covered solid warmth beneath it. Duncan matched his pace to hers and did not pull. At the porch, Alma released him first. He let his arm fall at once. From beyond the gate, Bale's voice carried through the wet air. "Ask her why Thomas was alone at the ferry that night." Alma stopped with one boot on the bottom step. Duncan did not turn toward Bale. He turned toward her. "Thomas was alone because Bale ordered him to be," Alma said. Her hand had already left Duncan's forearm, but the warmth of it remained beneath his wet sleeve. She stood on the bottom porch step with Lottie against her shoulder and watched the road where Bale had vanished. An unscheduled freight wagon came after dark. Covered load. No passengers. Duncan kept his body turned toward her, not the gate. What made it urgent? Bale never said. Did Thomas see what was under the cover? Not before he left the house. Alma climbed the remaining steps and moved beneath the porch roof. "He came home before supper to tell me the drum was wrong. There was a bright line on one of the pins where iron should have stayed dark. He wanted the ferry closed until the replacement pieces arrived. And Bale said the shipment was delayed." "Yes." Lottie began to pull at the edge of the dry blanket. Alma freed the cloth from her fist. "Bale told Thomas one wagon could not break sound iron, but Thomas did not believe the iron was sound." "No, why did he go?" Alma's jaw tightened. Because the driver was waiting. Because Bale held the lease. Because Thomas believed he could make one crossing and shut the drum himself before morning. She looked toward the wet yard, and because we needed the work. Duncan did not offer judgment disguised as comfort. What happened to the wagon? They dragged it from the river 2 days later. With the load? Empty. That answer widened the question instead of closing it. Duncan glanced toward the barn where Alma's valise sat beside the workbench, the sheared pin wrapped inside it. Samuel Price may know what freight was recorded for that road. If Bale recorded it, then the absence may matter too. Alma studied him. You believe Price will question Bale because a widow asks? No. The answer stopped her. I believe Price may question him because ferry hardware failed, a man died, and Bale threatened access to a public crossing. Your word begins the question. It should not be forced to carry the whole answer. Alma looked away first. Most men offered belief as though it were a favor they could withdraw. Duncan offered process. Less comforting, more useful. By noon sunlight had broken through the last clouds, and steam rose from the yard in pale strips. Evan had not yet returned from Alder Reach. Alma finished the shortened lead rope at the barn workbench, tested the splice around a post, and leaned her weight against it. The line held. Duncan opened the barn cash box and counted payment onto the bench. Alma looked at the coins. That is too much. It is less than a new rope. You supplied the rope. You saved the sound length. She separated 2 coins and pushed them back. Then this is the rate. Duncan considered the money, then returned it to the box. Agreed. No false generosity. No argument meant to prove he could afford more. Alma tucked the remaining coins into her purse. The exchange had barely ended when a dry crack sounded above the north stalls. One of the ranch hands looked up too late. Rain had soaked the upper layer of a haystack, adding weight against a roof brace already bowed from age. The timber bent another inch. Dust sifted down. "Clear the stalls," Alma called. The men froze. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the certainty of someone who had already seen what came next. "Move the horses now." Duncan followed her line of sight. "Evan, take the gray. Luke, get the bay mare out. Leave the tack." Men scattered. Alma lifted Lottie from the blanket-lined feed box and placed her farther back inside the barn office, where the wall stood beyond the fall line. She checked the child's reach, then pulled the door open so she could still see her. Another crack ran through the brace. The wet hay shifted. "We need a line over the center beam," Alma said. Duncan took down a coil of dry rope. "The ladder? Too slow if 2 men climb. 1 up, 1 feeds. The rest take tension." Duncan carried the ladder beneath the beam and climbed. Alma paid out rope from below, keeping the coil clear of boots and stall doors. He passed the end over the timber and dropped it. Alma caught it, ran both lengths around a heavy post, and began opening the strands. Luke reached for the line. "That knot will slip. It is not a knot." Her fingers worked faster. "Hold the lower turn. Do not pull until I say." Luke hesitated. Duncan came down the ladder. "Do as she says." Alma buried the first strand, rolled the rope, then tucked the second and third into the standing line. The fibers rasped across her palms. "Take tension." Duncan and Luke hauled. The rope tightened across the hay, drawing the stack back from the weakened brace. The timber groaned. Again, they pulled harder. The splice compressed, but did not shift. The stack settled into the rope's support. "Hold it there," Alma ordered. The other hands climbed from the safe side and began throwing the wet top bales down one at a time. 5 minutes later, the weight had eased. 10 minutes later, the cracked brace gave way with a dull report. The rope held the hay clear of the stalls. No horse was beneath it. No man was hurt. Luke stared at the broken timber, then at Alma's splice. "I thought it would slip." Alma rubbed the red line forming across one palm. "That is why I told you to hold the turn instead of arguing with it." Duncan turned his head before the hint of a smile reached his mouth. Alma saw it anyway. Later, after the wet hay had been spread beneath the lean-to, and Lottie had fallen asleep in the barn office, Duncan brought a fresh rope to the workbench. "Show me." Alma glanced at him. "You watched." "I watched your hands move faster than I could follow." A rancher admitting that may damage his standing. "My standing survived Luke." She sat opposite him with the rope between them. The first tuck sets the shape. The second keeps it from rolling open. If you force the strands against the lay, the splice weakens. Duncan tried the first turn and crossed 2 strands. Alma shook her head. You are fighting the rope. Does it object? More clearly than most men. He undid the mistake. Then teach me its language. Alma separated the strands again. Her hands hovered over his. May I show you? Duncan turned his palms upward. Yes. She placed her fingers over his and guided his right hand beneath the standing strand. His knuckles were rough and warmer than the rope. Alma moved his thumb into place, then folded the second strand across. He made no motion she had not directed. The contact remained work. Her awareness of it did not. Hold there, she said. His fingers closed around the rope beneath hers. Like this, less force. She adjusted his grip. Follow where it already wants to bend. Duncan watched their hands. Thomas taught you? Thomas taught me the ferry. My father taught me rope. He worked logging booms before he lost a leg. Then you had 2 teachers, and water corrected both of them. Duncan completed the first tuck. Was the covered wagon the only reason Thomas crossed that night? Bale said it carried something that could not wait until morning. Medicine. No doctor came looking for it. No merchant claimed it. Money? The wagon came from the North Maintenance Road, not the stage road. Alma withdrew her hands and let Duncan try the second tuck alone. After the accident, the driver disappeared before sunrise. Bale said. He continued west, without the wagon. Yes, Duncan finished the splice. Imperfect but sound enough to recognize the pattern. Then the load mattered more than the driver, or more than Thomas. Hoofbeats entered the yard. Evan rode in on the bay, mud dried to his boots and a folded paper tucked inside his coat. He dismounted and came straight to the barn. Samuel Price could not leave Alder Reach today, he said. He sent this from a copied entry in the local road records. Duncan broke the outer fold, but did not read past the first line before handing it to Alma. She opened the paper herself. The copied notation listed 4 approved round-shouldered clevis pins delivered to Alder Reach under the ferry account. Alma read the date once, then again. Her fingers tightened around the page. When? She lifted her face. 3 months before Thomas died. The copied delivery notice lay between them on the barn workbench, its ink dry and its meaning impossible to soften. 4 approved clevis pins had reached Alder Reach 3 months before Thomas died. Bale had told Thomas the shipment was delayed. One of those statements was false. Alma read the date again, then folded the paper along its original crease. A copied entry is not enough, she said. Bale will say Samuel Price misread the ledger. Duncan rested both hands on the bench. Then we need the ledger, the person who received the shipment, and someone who can tell us what happened to your pin. Alma glanced toward the house, where the sheared iron remained wrapped in linen inside her valise. Asabel, he repairs wagon irons, pulley hooks, mill fittings, and anything else men break before admitting they used it poorly. Does he owe Bale money? Not that I know. Does Bale control his freight? Some of it. Then he has something to lose. Duncan accepted the warning. So does everyone in Alder Reach. 3 days later, when the road had firmed enough beneath the sun to carry a buckboard, Duncan drove Alma and Lottie into the settlement. Alma kept the valise beneath her boots. The copied delivery notation rested inside her dress pocket, but the linen bundle stayed where her knees could feel the case. Alder Reach was one muddy street with a church, a general store, a post counter, and Asabel's smithy near the western edge. Men outside the store stopped talking as Duncan's wagon passed. One merchant turned his head toward Alma, then looked away too quickly. She remembered his face. Duncan did not offer reassurance. He drew the team to a stop beneath the smithy roof and climbed down. Asabel stood beside an open forge with a leather apron over his shirt and soot across both forearms. He was past 50, broad through the shoulders and missing the end of one thumb. Duncan introduced Alma without adding widow, accused, or dependent. Mrs. Keane worked the South Ferry, he said. She wants your judgment on a broken pin. Asa looked at Alma rather than Duncan. Her judgment first. Alma kept one hand on the valise handle. Why? Because you saw the iron before 5 months of river rust and handling. I did not. It was a better answer than curiosity. She lifted the case onto a scarred bench, opened it herself, and removed the linen bundle. Lottie sat in the buckboard within reach, occupied with the alder whistle tied to a strip of cloth. Alma unfolded the stained linen and placed the sheared pin on the bench. Asa did not touch it at once. He bent close enough to catch the daylight across the break, then turned his head to examine the narrowed neck. "Old square shoulder," he said. "The ferry used this pattern before Bale took the lease." "Can ordinary strain make that groove?" Alma asked. Asa lifted the pin with tongs and carried it to the doorway. "Strain rounds an edge. Rust eats where water sits. Neither leaves a straight cut." He scraped the dark material inside the groove with the point of a nail. A small fleck came loose. Asa pressed it between two fingers and smelled it. Pine pitch. Duncan stepped nearer but did not reach for the evidence. "Why put pitch there?" "To keep water out sometimes." Asa turned the pin. "Or to keep eyes out." He set it on a block and tapped the square shoulder with a light hammer. The iron answered with a firm ring. He tapped the narrowed section. The sound was flatter. Someone used a fine file here. Not one careless stroke. Enough passes to take strength from the neck without making the loss plain from a distance. Then pitch was worked into the groove. River grit settled over it. Alma's fingers closed around the edge of the bench. Could Thomas have done that through poor repair? Asa raised his eyes to her. "A man can weaken iron through ignorance. This was not ignorance. Can you prove who filed it? No. Can you prove when? Not to a day. Then Bale will say Thomas did it himself. Bale can say a mule held the file. It will not make the iron sound." Asa returned the pin to the linen. "I can tell Samuel Price the neck was thinned by a tool before the final rust formed. I can tell him pitch concealed the work. I cannot put that tool into a man's hand unless someone saw him use it." The answer gave Alma less than vindication and more than rumor. Deliberate weakening. No culprit. Duncan looked toward the street. "What sort of file would do it?" Asa rubbed the blunt end of his missing thumb against his apron. "Narrow, fine cut, the sort used close around a shoulder or inside a fitting." His gaze stayed on the iron. "I sold one like that last autumn." Alma's pulse struck once against her throat. "To whom?" Before Asa answered, Phineas Bale's voice carried from outside the smithy. "Lantern Creek cattle take the north detour from now on, no exceptions." Duncan turned. Bale stood beside the general store with two merchants and a freight driver. He spoke loudly enough for the street to hear. "Any business that assists Mrs. Keane in interfering with the ferry can expect its freight to wait behind those that do not." One merchant looked toward Asa's shop and lowered his eyes. The other folded his arms as if the threat were merely sensible trade. Duncan stepped to the smithy entrance. "You are denying public freight because a blacksmith examines iron?" Bale smiled. "I am choosing which customers receive prompt service." "And Lantern Creek stock?" "The north route remains open, 12 extra miles and a steeper grade. Then choose your company with care." Duncan did not move into the street. "Put the refusal in writing." Bale's smile vanished. "You still think paper will save you?" "No. I think it keeps a threat from changing shape later." Bale looked past him at Alma. "Every man who touches that woman's story will pay for it." Alma wrapped the pin herself. "Then your ferry depends on fear more than rope." Bale's face hardened. He turned to the merchants. "You heard me." He walked away without entering the smithy. Asa waited until Bale reached the far side of the store. "The file," Alma said. Asa nodded once. "Bale bought it 6 weeks before Keane died." Duncan's attention sharpened. "Was it entered under the ferry account?" "No." "Why not?" "He paid cash and told me it was private work." Asa glanced toward the account shelves inside his shop. "I will find the book." "Will you tell Price what you remember?" Alma asked. "I will tell him what I sold, when I sold it, and what Bale said. Nothing beyond that." "That is enough." Asa gave her a measuring look. "Most people ask a witness for more than he knows." Alma folded the final corner of linen over the pin. That is how truth becomes another lie. On the drive back to Lantern Creek, Lottie slept in Alma's arms while the valise remained wedged beneath her boots. Duncan did not ask to keep the pin or the copied notice. "Near the low road," he said, "Bale has moved from denying you to punishing anyone who listens. He has always done that. People only notice when the punishment reaches them." Asa noticed. Asa has his own business and fewer fears than most. Duncan guided the team around a washed rut. He also has the file entry. An entry proves a purchase. The pin proves the sort of work. Neither proves Bale used it. Duncan glanced at her. You will not ask the evidence to say more than it can. Thomas died beneath a lie made from pieces of truth. I will not build another one to clear him. That evening, Lottie refused sleep. She cried when Alma sat, cried harder when she stood still, and turned her face from the warmed milk. Duncan found them in the hall as he carried a lamp toward the bunkhouse. May I try? He asked. Alma hesitated, then placed Lottie in his arms. He settled the baby against his shoulder and walked in slow passes. Lottie's cries weakened into tired complaints. When Duncan reached the eastern end of the hall, he stopped before the locked room. His hand remained at his side. Alma stood several paces away. What is in there? She asked. Duncan adjusted Lottie's blanket, a cradle, a chest of clothes too small for anyone who ever wore them. Alma understood. Ruth? My wife. He said the name without turning it into a performance. She died 3 winters ago, lung illness. The doctor reached us twice before snow closed the road. Was the room hers? Ours. We prepared it the year before. His gaze rested on the closed door. The child did not live long enough to use it. Alma did not ask how long, or whether it had been a son or daughter, or what Ruth's last words were. Grief did not become more honest when every wound was opened for inspection. Lottie gave a tired sigh and laid her cheek against Duncan's collar. He turned from the locked room and carried her toward the porch. Outside, the evening smelled of wet earth and cottonwood bark. Duncan walked until Lottie's breathing deepened. When Alma opened her arms, he returned the baby at once. No second invitation required. The prompt release touched her more than his gentleness. He had enjoyed holding Lottie. He still gave her back without making Alma ask. Duncan rested one hand on the porch rail. Alma stood beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his sleeve in the cooling air. You were good with her, she said. She was too tired to object. Lottie objects even in sleep. Then I have survived a stern judgment. Alma almost smiled. She thought of the locked room, Thomas beneath the river, Ruth behind a name Duncan rarely spoke, and the people in Alder Reach who treated grief as proof of unreliability. Slowly, she placed her hand over Duncan's on the rail. He did not turn his palm beneath hers or close his fingers. He stayed still and let her decide the length of the touch. His skin was rough and warm. Alma withdrew before the gesture became a promise neither of them had earned. You should eat, she said. I was going to the bunkhouse. There is a table in your kitchen. It has managed without me. Tables are patient. Duncan glanced toward the house. That sounds doubtful. He carried the lamp inside and ate supper at his own kitchen table for the first time in months. They had nearly finished when hoofbeats entered the yard. Asa Bell appeared at the door with his apron rolled beneath one arm and an old account book under the other. He opened it to a marked line and set it before Alma. 1 fine-cut narrow file, he said. Paid in cash by Phineas Bale. Alma read the date. 6 weeks before Thomas died. Asa tapped the margin. And he told me not to put it under the ferry account. Asa's account book remained open beneath the kitchen lamp. The entry was plain enough to survive any man's opinion. 1 fine-cut narrow file, paid in cash by Phineas Bale 6 weeks before Thomas died. Alma read it twice, then lifted her eyes to Asa. Will, you say only what you remember. That is all I intend to say. You did not see him use it. No. You do not know whether it touched the ferry pin. No. And you will not guess. Asa closed the book. Mrs. Keane. I have spent 30 years listening to men improve their stories after iron proved them wrong. I have no wish to join them. Duncan stood at the end of the table with one hand resting on the chair back. Will you give the same account to Samuel Price? I will give him the date, the tool, the payment, and Bale's instruction not to charge it to the ferry. Asa slid the book beneath his arm. Nothing more. Nothing more is needed, Alma said. Asa studied her before leaving. Most people say that before asking for more. Then most people want victory more than truth. After he rode away, Alma carried the sheared pin back to the guest room and placed it beneath her folded dress inside the valise. Bale's notice lay above it. Asa's account stayed with Asa. The copied delivery entry remained in Alma's dress pocket. Each fact had its own owner. That mattered. 2 mornings later, a churchwoman from Alder Reach arrived in a small cart with a basket of bread. and a smile that did not reach the questions in her eyes. Mrs. Wilkes had heard Alma and Lottie were still at Lantern Creek. She offered a room behind the church meeting hall and called it a Christian kindness. Alma listened from the porch while Lottie sat on a blanket near her feet, striking the alder whistle against a wooden spoon. Duncan remained inside the barn across the yard. He did not join the conversation. "Would the room have a latch?" Alma asked. Mrs. Wilkes blinked. "There is no need. The church is respectable. Who else has a key?" "I do. Reverend Hale does." His wife, naturally. "Would Lottie remain with me?" "At night, certainly. During the day, the women's circle would help. A young widow should not carry every burden alone." Alma watched Lottie catch the spoon handle in both hands. "What does help mean?" "A proper feeding schedule. Regular prayer. Time for you to seek work." "Who decides when I take her back?" Mrs. Wilkes's smile thinned. "No one would keep a child from her mother." "That was not my question. You are very guarded. I am asking what I would be agreeing to. Only good order." Alma looked toward the cart. The basket held bread enough for 2 days. Beneath it lay a folded child's dress, clean and mended. The offer was not cruel. That made it more dangerous. Kind control still closed around the same throat. "Thank you," Alma said. "We will not take the room." Mrs. Wilkes's mouth tightened. "People will say Mr. Rowe has made an improper arrangement. People said my husband drank because Bale needed them to. This is not the same. No. This time I am still here to answer." Mrs. Wilkes gathered the basket. "You may regret refusing respectable help." Alma lifted Lottie before the woman could reach for her. "Regret belongs to the person who chooses. So does refusal." The cart left before noon. Duncan waited until its wheels disappeared beyond the cottonwoods before crossing the yard. He stopped at the foot of the porch. "Do you want me to ask what she offered?" "A room with 3 keys and a child schedule I would not control." "Then no. You agree too quickly. It was not my room to accept." Alma shifted Lottie to her other hip. "I cannot remain here on words alone. No, Bale will say I trade company for shelter." Duncan absorbed the insult without pretending it could not harm her. "Then we write the terms." He brought paper, ink, and a ruler to the kitchen table. Evan sat near the stove as witness. Duncan wrote in a slow, firm hand. The room was not wages. The work purchased no obedience. Alma could refuse a task without surrendering the roof that same hour. Either party could end the work agreement with 3 days' notice unless danger required immediate departure. Lottie remained under Alma's authority. No affection, courtship, or future promise was owed. Alma read every line. "This sounds as though you expect me to accuse you. It sounds as though memory changes when money, shelter, and pride are mixed together. And if I leave tomorrow, you take what you earned. If I stop working, you still have 3 days to arrange travel. If Bale blocks the road, then weather and road safety. Decide whether you can leave, not me." She corrected the rate for rope repair and added that any ferry work would require a separate agreement. Duncan accepted the change. They made 2 copies. Alma signed one as Alma Keane. Duncan signed both. Evan witnessed them. Duncan gave Alma her copy and did not ask where she would keep it. She placed it in the valise beside Bale's notice, above the wrapped pin. By late afternoon, a rider brought a letter bearing the mark of a hardware supplier in Pomeroy. Samuel Price had requested commercial confirmation after receiving Evan's message. Duncan handed the sealed letter to Alma. "It is addressed to Price, care of Lantern Creek." "Then you should open." Price said either of us may read the contents if both are present. Alma broke the seal while Duncan stood across the table. The supplier confirmed 4 approved round-shouldered clevis pins, and related fittings had been shipped to Bale's ferry operation the previous August. No return shipment had been received. "This proves the hardware left Pomeroy," Duncan said. "Not who accepted it. Price will need the local receipt ledger if Bale has not removed it." Wind struck the west wall before dusk. A cold thread of air moved through the guest room where Lottie slept. Alma found the seam by holding the lamp near the plaster. The flame bent hard. She packed cloth into the gap, but another gust pushed it loose. Lottie woke coughing once from the cold air, then began to cry. Duncan came only as far as the hall. "What happened?" The wall seam opened. He looked toward the east room. The locked door stood at the end of the corridor, its brass key hanging from a nail above the frame. Duncan took the key down but did not place it in the lock. "The nursery is warmer." Alma held Lottie close. "You do not have to open it. She cannot sleep in this draft. We can move downstairs. The kitchen stove will die before morning." His hand closed around the key. Ruth chose that room because it held heat. The name settled between them. Duncan inserted the key and turned it. The lock resisted, then gave with a dry click. He opened the door without entering. The room smelled of cedar, folded linen, and years without breath. A narrow cradle stood near the inner wall. Yellow curtains hung at the window. On a shelf rested a small framed photograph of Ruth, one hand curved over the back of a chair. Beside it sat a wooden horse missing one wheel. Alma stepped inside with Lottie. The air was warmer. "The chimney wall carries heat from downstairs," Duncan said from the threshold. "The cradle is sound. I checked it every winter. But you never used the room." "No." Alma laid Lottie in the cradle. The baby gripped the edge, then settled when Alma placed the wooden spoon beside her. Duncan remained outside. "You may close the door," Alma said. "I do not want to shut you in. I meant behind you." He stared at the floorboards inside the room. Alma did not invite him again. She adjusted Lottie's blanket and moved Ruth's photograph farther from the cradle's reach without turning it face down. When she looked back, Duncan had crossed the threshold. One step. No more. "I used to think entering meant I had chosen to forget her," he said. "Did staying out help you remember?" Duncan's breath left through his nose. "No." Lottie made a small sound and rolled toward the wall. Alma steadied the blanket. Duncan's gaze followed her hand, then lifted to her face. He came nearer slowly enough that she could have stepped away. She did not. His fingers touched her cheek. Warm, rough, almost weightless. Alma's breath caught, but not from fear. Duncan paused. The room narrowed to the space between them. His thumb moved once beneath her cheekbone. Alma leaned toward him by a fraction. So did he. Their mouths came close enough for shared breath. Lottie shifted in the cradle. Duncan stopped. He lowered his hand without pretending the moment had not happened. Alma did not apologize for staying. A horse entered the yard at speed. Evan called from below, "Duncan." Boots struck the porch. A rider's voice carried through the house. "Bale's men are clearing the ferry tool shed. They're hauling equipment out before Price gets there." Duncan did not reach for his coat. The rider's report still hung in the nursery doorway, urgent enough to make every instinct lean toward the road. But he looked first at Alma, then at Lottie in Ruth's cradle. "How dark?" he asked. "Near full," the rider said. "Clouds over the river. How many men?" "3 that I saw. Maybe 4. Did they leave the shed?" "Not yet. They were loading a wagon." Duncan turned to Evan. "Take the bay to the ridge above the north road. Do not go near the ferry. Watch which direction the wagon travels and come back before moonset." Evan nodded. "You are not riding down there?" the rider asked. "Not blind, not outnumbered, and not while Bale chooses the ground." Duncan's refusal carried more strength than a reckless pursuit would have. Alma heard it. He was not confusing action with haste. Evan rode out within minutes. Duncan sent the rider to sleep in the bunkhouse and remained in the kitchen until the hoofbeats faded beyond the cottonwoods. Alma stood across the table with the supplier letter folded beneath one hand. "Bale may empty the shed before Price arrives. He may. Then waiting costs us evidence. Riding in darkness may cost us witnesses." Duncan's gaze moved to the nursery hall. "And it may leave Lottie here with men we do not know are watching the ranch." Alma had already measured the same risks. His answer did not remove her frustration. It made the frustration useful. "Then we need to know where the load goes. Evan will tell us what he can prove." They waited without pretending the night was calm. Near midnight, Evan returned with mud to the horse's knees. A heavy maintenance wagon had left the ferry road and turned north toward the abandoned road sheds beyond Alder Reach. Bale had ridden beside it. 2 men followed. Evan had not gone close enough to identify the load. "Deep tracks?" Alma asked. "Deep enough that the rear wheels cut through the old ruts." "Covered?" Canvas tied low. The wagon had not gone toward Pomeroy, where county equipment would properly be delivered. It had gone toward an unused shed. Another partial answer. A larger question. 5 days passed before Samuel Price could leave his road inspection south of Pomeroy. During that time, Duncan did not ride to the abandoned sheds or send ranch hands to trespass. Alma did not let impatience make the case weaker. She worked, cared for Lottie, and watched the North Road whenever dust rose beyond the timber. Bale made no visit. His absence felt deliberate. When Price arrived on May 20th, he came with a leather document case, a folded certified abstract from the county road records in Pomeroy, and the expression of a man who had learned not to trust tidy accounts. He was lean, gray at the temples, and more interested in dates than accusations. "I will inspect records before iron," he told Alma. "Paper can tell me what should exist. Your pen may tell me what did." They went to Alder Reach in 2 wagons. Alma kept the sheared pin in her valise and did not produce it. Price, Duncan, Asa, and Alma entered the back room beside the post counter, where local ferry maintenance and receipt ledgers were stored in a locked cabinet. The postmaster handed the key to Price and remained as witness. Bale arrived before the first book was opened. "Those records concern my lease," he said. Price placed his document case on the table. "They concern a county crossing. You have no complaint except hers. I have a dead operator, failed hardware, a delivery abstract, and a closed question inspection that has not yet begun." Bale looked at Alma. "She has made grief into an occupation." Price opened the cabinet. "Then the record should have no trouble proving her wrong." That ended the argument more cleanly than anger could have. The first ledger held tolls, weather closures, and routine repairs. Thomas's handwriting appeared in narrow, upright entries. Alma recognized it before she was close enough to read. Her body knew the shape of his letters. The second book covered maintenance receipts. Price compared dates against the certified county abstract. 4 approved round-shouldered clevis pins and related fittings had been delivered on August 17, 1886. A local receipt stood beside the entry. The signature beneath it was broad and slanted, Phineas Bale. Duncan did not speak. Asa leaned over the page. Price asked the postmaster to identify the ledger, then asked Bale whether the signature was his. Bale's mouth tightened. "It appears to be." "Did you receive 4 replacement pins?" "I received unsuitable stock." "Where are they?" "Returned." Price opened the supplier letter Alma had brought. "The Pomeroy supplier records no return." "Then they were misplaced." 4 heavy iron pieces were misplaced after you signed for them. Men make errors." Alma kept her hands flat against the table. Thomas asked where they were. Bale ignored her. Price turned pages. After the August delivery, the ferry account showed repeated charges for emergency work on the old drum hardware. New pins had arrived. Old pins remained in service. Bale had billed the county to maintain pieces that should have been replaced. "Why continue repairs?" Price asked. "Because the delivered pins did not fit." Was that reported? Not every practical judgment becomes paperwork. Thomas made it paperwork. Price had found the maintenance ledger. On a page dated 6 days before Thomas's death, Thomas had written, "Replace before winter water, old shoulder worn. Drum protested under loaded wagon." The entry had been crossed through with 1 line but not erased. Beneath it appeared a later note in Thomas's hand. "Ordered by Le to remain open for late freight. Replacement required." Bale had written 1 word below it, "Continue." Alma read the word and heard Thomas closing the cottage door that final night. She had been angry. Lottie had been crying. Thomas had promised the crossing would take less than an hour. Alma had told him Bale's toll mattered more to him than coming home. Those were the last words she gave her husband. For 5 months she had carried them as if they pushed him into the river. Price's finger rested beside the entry, not on it. "Mrs. Keane, is this Thomas's handwriting?" "Yes." Her voice held. "Both lines?" "Yes." "And the word below?" "Bale's." Bale stepped toward the table. "She cannot identify a man's hand because she wants someone blamed." The postmaster spoke before Alma could. "That is Bale's writing. I have accepted his freight notices for 9 years." Asa nodded toward the receipt ledger. "Same hand as the signature." Price closed neither book. "The crossing is closed as of now. No loaded ferry operation until the hardware is located, the drum inspected, and the emergency restraint examined." "You will ruin trade over 1 widow and 2 old ledgers," Bale said. "No," Price replied. The ledgers explain why trade is no longer trusted to your judgment. Bale left without another word. By dusk, the closure notice was fixed at both ferry approaches. Price secured the local ledgers under his seal and retained the certified abstract in his case. Alma still held the pin. The proof was stronger now, but incomplete. Bale had received the replacement hardware. Thomas had warned him. The pieces were missing. None of it yet proved who filed the old pin. At Lantern Creek, Alma carried Lottie to the nursery and stood beside Ruth's photograph until the child settled. Duncan waited in the hall. He had not followed her into the room. "I told Thomas Bale's toll mattered more to him than us," Alma said, "the last night." Duncan did not hurry to deny the pain. "You were angry. I was cruel. Did your words file the pin?" She faced him. "No." "Did they hide the replacements?" "No." "Did they write 'continue' beneath his warning?" Her throat tightened. "No." "Then they may be words you regret. They are not the act that killed him." Alma looked toward Lottie asleep in the cradle. "Why do you want me here?" Duncan's answer came after thought, not surprise. "Because you see what others miss. Because you tell the truth even when it costs you shelter. Because this house feels inhabited when you are in it." He took one breath. "And because I think about your hand on mine after you remove it." Alma crossed the hall herself. "May I kiss you?" Duncan's eyes held hers. Yes. She placed her palm against his cheek and touched her mouth to his, brief, warm. No claim beyond the moment chosen. When she drew back, Duncan did not follow. He let her decide the distance that remained. Hoofbeats struck the yard before either spoke. Evan entered the porch at a run. "Price's closure trapped 2 families on the far bank," he said. "Bale cut the ordinary road behind them. The north road is blocked with a felled cottonwood," Evan said. "Bale's men left the branches tangled across it. 2 wagons are waiting on the far side, and the water is climbing." Duncan had not yet moved from the nursery hall. Alma still stood close enough to remember the brief warmth of their first kiss, but the river had already reclaimed the space between them. "Children?" she asked. "One family has 2. The other has an older woman who cannot walk far." "How high at the secondary landing?" "Below the second stake when I left." Alma lifted Lottie from Ruth's cradle and placed the alder whistle beneath the baby's blanket. "It may be above it now." Price had closed the main ferry for cause. Opening it again would turn the stranded families into another argument Bale could win with fear. Leaving them where they were would do the same. Duncan reached for his coat. "What do you need?" Alma answered before he could offer a plan. The long shoreline, the flat-bottomed skiff, 2 men who follow orders before asking why. "You have 3. They reached the secondary landing before full dark. The river ran brown and fast, carrying leaves, fence rails, and 1 drowned branch thick as a man's thigh. Across the water, 2 wagons waited on a gravel shelf above the far bank. A man held a lantern high. Beside him stood a woman with a child against each skirt. The second wagon carried an older couple, the woman seated beneath a blanket. Price was already there with Isabel and 2 Alder Reach men. Bale stood on the closed ferry platform, as if ownership alone could make it lawful. "The main crossing will carry them," he called. "Price closed it because of missing hardware," Alma answered. "Then Price can open it again." "No," Price said. "The closure stands." Bale spread his hands toward the families. "You hear that, Mrs. Keane would rather prove a point than bring children home." Alma did not answer him. She looked at the current. The secondary landing lay upstream of the main ferry, where a narrow bend softened the direct pull. The skiff could cross if kept nose upstream and tethered to a shoreline. 1 bad angle would turn it broadside. "Duncan, take the south line around that cottonwood," she said. "Not tight. Let it travel through your hands." He obeyed without asking whether another arrangement might display more strength. Asa took the second line. Price called across the river and told the families to unload all but blankets and necessary medicine. Bale stepped off the platform. "You are putting them in a boat no larger than a trough." 3 controlled trips, Alma said. 2 children and their mother first, then the older woman and her husband. The remaining man last, and their wagons stay where they are until the road is cleared. Their freight is not worth a child. The first father hesitated on the far bank. Bale saw it. "Ask her how many ferries she has lost." Alma raised the whistle and blew one clear note. Duncan took the line into his palms. The sound traveled farther than argument. "The skiff will come to you," Alma called. "Keep the children seated on the bottom. Do not stand when it touches shore." She pushed into the current with Asa holding the stern. Water caught the bow and tried to turn it. Duncan paid out rope at the pace she had shown him. Alma pulled once on the right oar, then twice on the left. The skiff crossed at an angle, not fighting the river, borrowing its force. When she reached the far shelf, the mother stepped forward with both children. The younger boy began to cry. "I want the ferry." "The ferry is closed," Alma said. "This boat is open." The father looked toward Bale, then at the current. "Can you hold it? If everyone does what I say." That was not reassurance. It was a condition. He placed the children into the skiff. The mother climbed in after them and sat where Alma directed. On the return, one boy reached toward a floating branch. Alma caught his wrist before he leaned over the side and placed his hand around the center brace. "Hold that. Your job is important." He stopped crying. At the near bank, Duncan drew in line only when Alma raised her hand. The skiff touched mud with scarcely a turn. The father on the far side watched the landing, then stopped looking toward Bale. The second trip carried the older woman and her husband. The woman could not bend one knee, so Alma shifted weight beneath the seat and brought her aboard without forcing the joint. Duncan kept the rope moving through his palms. A man beside him tried to take the line. "She told him," Duncan said. He did not surrender it. The third trip brought the remaining father and a satchel of medicine. When all 7 people stood on the near bank, no one cheered. The mother gathered her children. The older man thanked Alma once. The father who had doubted her turned to Price. "Keep the main crossing closed until she says it is sound." Bale's face changed, not because a crowd had turned, but because one useful man no longer repeated his words. Price arranged shelter in Alder Reach and men to begin clearing the felled tree at daylight. Bale remained near the platform. A skiff crossing proves nothing about the ferry. Alma tied the boat above the waterline. "It proves the stranded families did not need your unsafe drum." By the next afternoon, the river had fallen 6 inches. Price came to Lantern Creek with Asa and 2 men from Alder Reach who had witnessed the skiff rescue. "I need the upstream restraint inspected," he told Alma. "The main cable is documented. The emergency line is not." Duncan reached for his saddle blanket. Alma was standing beside the porch with Lottie on one hip. The baby had begun pulling herself upright against furniture, but she still dropped without warning when her knees forgot their work. "You should stay here," Alma said. Duncan stopped. "With Lottie?" "With Lottie and the house." Her valise remained in the guest room. The sheared pin was still wrapped inside it. Bale knew Price was inspecting the ferry. He also knew Alma would likely be present. "You think he will come here?" "I think he may send someone. I do not know. That is why I need a person who will not leave because he imagines danger somewhere else." Duncan looked toward the road, then back at her. "What are your instructions?" The absence of argument struck deeper than agreement. Alma placed Lottie in his arms. The baby immediately caught his collar and tried to pull herself higher. Alma removed the alder whistle from beneath Lottie's blanket and held it between them. "One short note if she becomes frightened and familiar sound settles her. 2 notes only if she will not settle and truly needs me. 1 for comfort. 2 for you. Do not follow us. I will not. Do not send Evan after us unless Price sends word first. I will not." Alma placed the whistle in his free hand. "If anyone comes asking for the valise, they remain outside. Even if they claim county authority, they wait for Price or show written authority with a named officer." Duncan adjusted Lottie without shifting closer to Alma. "Anything else?" She looked at the child against his chest, then at the man who had kissed her only after she asked, and now accepted a harder trust without demanding reward. "Bring her back to me when I reach for her." "Yes." The inspection party left in daylight. At the ferry, Price posted 1 witness at each end of the platform before anyone touched the mechanism. The emergency restraint ran upstream from the ferry frame to an alder-rooted anchor beyond the bank. It appeared intact from a distance. Up close, Alma saw the pitch first. A dark band lay beneath newer river grit too smooth for ordinary repair. "Do not pull it," she said. Asa crouched beside her. Alma separated the outer fibers with the point of a bone marlinspike. Beneath them, several inner strands had been cut halfway through. The edges were pale where the knife had entered. Pitch had been pressed over the wound and worked between the fibers. Price swore once under his breath. "Can we remove it?" "Not today," Alma said. "The line is still carrying no working load, but taking it off without replacement rigging may shift the platform. Leave it attached. Mark it out of service." Price measured the damaged section from the iron anchor ring and sketched the position in his notebook. Asa removed a pinch of outer fiber and pitch no larger than a fingernail. He folded it into paper. Price and Asa signed across the fold. One witness tied white cord above the cut. The other tied a second cord below it. Price fixed a written closure tag at the brake housing and another at the upstream anchor. "The main ferry remains closed," he said. "No one uses this line. No one removes it until a sound replacement and enough men are present. The entire restraint remained connected at both ends. Unafe. Visible waiting." Alma stared at the concealed cut. "This was made to fail under strain." "Could Bale say you did it?" one witness asked. "He will," Alma said. "That is why you watched us find it before we touched it." They returned to Lantern Creek before sunset. Duncan sat on the porch with Lottie asleep against his chest. He had not used the whistle. Evan stood near the gate and no fresh tracks crossed the yard. When Alma climbed the steps and opened her arms, Duncan gave Lottie back immediately. Then he placed the whistle in Alma's palm, one feeding half a cup. She slept after fighting it. Alma closed her fingers around the alder wood. Anyone come? No, he had stayed. He had not turned fear into disobedience. Lottie woke enough to grip Alma's collar. Through the nursery window behind them, orange light suddenly climbed the evening sky. Evan shouted from the yard. Beyond the cottonwoods at the ferry road, the tool shed was burning. The tool shed roof fell before anyone reached the river road. Sparks climbed into the darkening air, and the sound of the collapse carried across the wet fields like a door slammed on whatever Bale had moved before the fire began. Price reached the landing first and ordered every man back from the flames. "No one enters. No one pulls iron from the ash. We wait until daylight." Alma stood beyond the heat with the alder whistle beneath her coat and watched water from the men's buckets turn to steam against the black boards. Duncan remained beside her, not touching, close enough to hear when she said, "The fire is not the first act, no. The wagon left before it." Even saw that. Alma lowered her gaze to the road. Mud preserved what fire could not. Behind the shed, two sets of wheel tracks cut through older ruts. The inbound marks were shallow. The outbound pair sank deep enough to expose pale clay beneath the topsoil. A short drag mark ran from the rear doors to the place where the wagon had stood. "Price," she called. He came without crossing the fresh ruts. Alma pointed. Whatever left was heavier than whatever arrived. Asa Bell crouched several feet away and measured the spacing with the handle of his hammer. "Same narrow set as Bale's maintenance wagon." Price raised a hand before the conclusion could outrun the fact. "Consistent with it, not proof of it." "Agreed," Alma said. Bale appeared beyond the closure rope while the shed still burned. "You set this fire to hide your own damage." Price faced him. "You will remain outside the marked ground. That property is under my lease. The crossing is under county closure." Bale looked past him at Alma. "Everything burns near her, and still you call her unlucky." Alma did not answer. He wanted anger because anger could be retold. She gave him nothing he could use. Price posted 2 men to watch the site through the night. Duncan took the second half of the guard without being asked. Alma returned to Lantern Creek with Lottie because evidence was not protected by leaving a child unsecured. At first light on May 24th, she came back with Evan and a covered basket of food for the watchers. The ashes were cold enough to approach. Price measured the wheel ruts, the drag marks, and the distance from the shed doors. Asa drew the wagon spacing in his account paper. They found warped hooks, burned harness leather, and empty shelving. No replacement pins, no crates, no useful record of what had been removed. The fire had answered one question. Bale had wanted the shed empty before Price saw it. It raised another. Where had the load gone? On the morning of May 25th, Alma rose before dawn and carried Lottie into Alder Reach. Mrs. Wilkes waited behind the church meeting hall. Her expression suggested she remembered Alma's earlier refusal, but the terms this time were spoken plainly before Duncan, Asa, and Price. "Lottie stays here until we return," Alma said. "She eats what I have packed. No one takes her from this building. If I reach for her, she is returned to me." Mrs. Wilkes drew herself upright. "I would never keep a child from her mother, then say yes." The woman looked at Duncan, perhaps expecting him to soften the demand. He did not. "Yes," she said. Alma placed Lottie in her arms only after the agreement was complete. The baby reached back once, then settled when Alma sounded one short note on the whistle. Alma carried the whistle with her. The sheared pin remained wrapped in linen inside the valise beneath her feet as the buckboard left for Pomeroy. 18 miles of muddy road took most of the morning. They reached the county offices near noon with the horses flecked to the chest and Duncan's coat gray with dried road spray. Justice Elias Ward received them in a narrow room above a mercantile. He was a spare man with silver at his beard and no interest in dramatic accusation. "Who has possessed the iron since it was recovered?" he asked. Alma answered from the beginning. She found it below the ferry drum after Thomas died. No one else had stored it. Duncan and Asa had examined it only in her presence. It had remained wrapped in the valise. Ward wrote every transfer and every absence of transfer. Asa gave his limited opinion. The neck was worked with a fine file. Pitch was pressed into the groove. I cannot say who held the file. Price presented the certified abstract from county road records, showing 4 approved pins delivered to Bale's ferry operation. The original remained with the county clerk. Ward compared the date, read the supplier confirmation, and asked Alma whether she understood that once sealed, the pin would no longer be hers to carry. "It was never mine to own," she said, "only mine to keep from disappearing." She unwrapped the linen herself and laid the broken iron on Ward's desk. For 5 months its weight had lived beside her clothes, her coins, and every plan for Lottie. Releasing it felt less like relief than stepping away from a grave without knowing whether anyone else would tend it. Ward wrapped the pin in fresh cloth, tied the bundle, pressed his seal across the knot, and entered it in his evidence register. The original stained linen was folded separately and marked as part of Alma's possession history. "The iron stays here," he said. "Your statement and Mr. Bell's will remain with it." Alma looked at the sealed bundle once. "Good." They left Pomeroy in early afternoon and did not reach Alder Reach until after dark. Lottie began crying when Alma entered the church room. Mrs. Wilkes stood to explain that the child had been difficult after sunset. Alma opened her arms. The baby was returned immediately. No sermon, no delay. Alma held Lottie close and sounded one quiet note against her hair. Duncan waited by the door until mother and child had settled. The next morning, May 26th, the ordinary ferry remained closed, and the north detour was too long for medicine, mail, and light passengers who could not afford another day. Price gave Alma temporary responsibility for a controlled hand ferry schedule at the secondary landing. "You set the loads," he said. "You close it when the current turns." Alma posted the order herself. Medicine first, then mail, then lamp oil, then passengers without freight. One merchant protested when his crate of dry goods was held back. "I pay the same as anyone." "Then you wait the same as anyone," Alma said. "The medicine crosses first. The first trip carried fever powder and 2 sealed letters. The second carried the post sack. The third carried lamp oil in 2 small tins, separated and lashed low." Duncan managed the shoreline under Alma's direction. He did not offer his judgment over hers, even when men watched. A father who had challenged her during the earlier skiff rescue brought his child's medicine across safely and followed every instruction without argument. No one applauded. They simply began asking Alma what weight the current would take. By late afternoon, the last passenger stepped onto the near bank. Alma tied the skiff above the waterline and checked the knot twice. Duncan stood beside the cottonwood with the wet shoreline coiled at his boots. "You gave the pin away," he said. "I placed it where Bale cannot take it from my room." "Yes." He nodded as though the answer required no repair. Men from Alder Reach passed behind them carrying empty mail sacks. Alma could feel their attention without turning toward it. She reached for Duncan's hand. Publicly. Deliberately. His fingers closed around hers, firm enough to answer, restrained enough not to turn the gesture into a claim. They stood that way until the last wagon left. On May 28th, thunder gathered beyond the northern timber. Price rode into Lantern Creek before supper, with rain beginning on his shoulders. Bale's maintenance wagon was seen near the abandoned road shed, he said, loaded heavy, headed toward the closed ferry road. Alma looked toward the darkening ridge. The storm had found the missing road before they had. By the night of June 2nd, the storm had swallowed the northern ridge. Rain hammered Lantern Creek's roof, hard enough to wake Lottie twice. And every time thunder rolled, Alma listened for the smaller sound beneath it, the river rising where no one could see. Near midnight, a rider struck the porch at a gallop. Duncan opened the door before the man dismounted. Bale's maintenance wagon left the north road shed, the rider said. Heavy load, headed for the closed ferry. Alma was already wrapping the alder whistle's cord around her wrist. How long ago? Less than an hour. Anyone aboard besides Bale's men? 3 travelers from the far road, one with a boy. Price's closure notices had been posted at both approaches. No lawful crossing could be made on the main ferry. Bale was not carrying freight through danger because the road demanded it. He was moving something before the storm or the county could hold him still. Alma turned to Evan's sister, who had come from the bunkhouse, and now stood in the hall with Lottie against her shoulder. Keep her here. 1 feeding if she wakes again. Do not take her outside even if riders come. I understand. Alma touched Lottie's hair once. The baby was warm, sleepy, and safe. Duncan waited beside the door with his coat on, but made no motion to hurry her. Ready? He asked. Yes. They rode out with Price and Asa, while Evan remained at Lantern Creek. The road to the ferry had become a dark channel between soaked fields. Mud pulled at the horses' hooves, and runoff crossed the wheel ruts in narrow silver sheets. By the time they reached the south approach, dawn was still hours away, but lightning gave the river a white, violent shape. Bale had already moved the maintenance wagon onto the ferry platform. Its rear wheels sat too close to the downstream rail. 2 horses stood harnessed, heads high, traces trembling. A torn oilcloth covered the wagon bed beneath feed sacks. 3 unwilling travelers huddled near the upstream side. An older man, a woman holding a boy of perhaps 6, and a freight driver with one arm bound against his chest. Bale's 2 workers stood near the brake housing. Samuel Price dismounted in the road and raised his lantern. The crossing is closed. Unload the wagon and bring the people off. Bale stood beside the brake lever. Rain ran from his hat brim. The north road is flooded. They cannot remain here. Then they shelter in Alder Reach until daylight. And lose their freight. Their freight is not my concern. It should be. The county will answer for delay. Alma stepped past Price far enough to see the platform angle. The ferry is already carrying too much weight aft. Bale's gaze cut toward her. You have no authority here. Neither do you under closure. 1 feed sack shifted against the wagon wheel. A crate corner appeared beneath it, dark wood bearing a stenciled line Alma could read even through rain. Scanty road equipment. Bale kicked the sack back into place. Price saw it. So did Asa. Unload the crate, Price said. Now. Bale's hand closed around the brake lever. You want the county's property? It will be at the far bank. The county's property does not cross on a closed ferry. Price moved toward the platform. Bale released the brake. The main cable groaned. The ferry slid from the bank before anyone on shore could reach it. The woman shouted and caught the boy against her. The wagon team lurched as the platform dipped. One of Bale's men grabbed the upstream rail. The other tried to seize the brake, but Bale knocked his hand away. Keep it moving. The platform entered the stronger current and yawed downstream. Alma heard the cable change pitch. He released too much, she said. The ferry was no longer traveling square across the river. The rear heavy wagon pulled the stern downstream, turning the broad side toward the current. The main cable still held, but its angle forced the platform against the upstream emergency restraint. The same line Price had marked out of service after they found it cut strands. White witness cords flashed near the alder-rooted anchor. The backup line came taut. Several inner fibers opened beneath the pitch-darkened wound. Price swore and ran toward the lower bank. "It is taking load. Because the platform is slewing," Alma said. She raised her voice. "Everyone listen. No one pulls unless I give the order." Bale shouted from the platform. "Take the brake. Do not touch it." Alma called to his workers. "A hard correction will throw the wagon." The freight driver braced his good hand against the rail. The older man moved toward the boy and mother. Alma pointed. "Price, clear the lower bank and anyone downstream of the anchor. If that line parts, it will whip." Price sent 2 men back up the road and drove the remaining spectators behind a cottonwood rise. "Asa, get the longest sound stock line. Run it through the south anchor ring." Asa and Duncan were already moving. "Duncan, bring the bay. Rope around the saddle horn. 1 turn only. Do not hard lock it." Duncan looked from the line to Alma. Rain streamed down his face. "Where do you need me?" "South bank, 10 yards above the anchor. Keep the horse facing uphill. You take tension only when I signal." "What signal?" Alma pulled the alder whistle free. 1 note means hold, 2 means take tension, 3 means release everything. Duncan repeated it. 1 hold, 2 take, 3 release. Do not guess, I will not. On the ferry, the wagon rolled half a foot when 1 rear wheel climbed a warped deck plank. The horses screamed and struck backward against the traces. The woman dropped to her knees, covering the boy's head. "Move upstream," Alma shouted. "All passengers to the upper rail. Stay low." The older man took the woman by the elbow. The injured driver moved with them. One of Bale's men obeyed. The other remained beside the team, sawing uselessly at a wet knot. "Unhitch from the wagon first," Alma called. "Breast straps, then traces. Do not free the reins until both horses are loose." Bale seized the brake lever again. "We can reach the far landing." "Not at this angle," Alma said. "You will roll the wagon through the rail. You do not command my ferry. The river does not care whose name is on the lease." A gust lifted the torn oilcloth. The cover ripped against a wagon stake, exposing 2 county-marked crates beneath the feed sacks. One lid had shifted enough to reveal straw grease and the rounded shoulder of new iron fittings. The missing hardware, still packed, still unused. Price saw it from shore. "Bale!" The name cracked across the water. Bale dragged the oilcloth down, but the next roll of the wagon tore it free again. The crate remained visible to every witness on the bank. The platform swung farther downstream. The emergency line snapped tight enough to hum. At the marked cut, pale inner strands began separating one at a time. Alma could hear the dry ticking beneath the river's roar. Thomas had once described that sound to her. A line dying from the inside while its outer fibers pretended to hold. She moved to Duncan's position. Asa had passed the sound stock rope through the south anchor ring. Duncan sat the bay facing uphill, with the rope laid once around the saddle horn, exactly as ordered. He had not taken tension. The ferry drifted another yard. Every instinct in him showed in the set of his shoulders, but his hands remained open enough to obey. Alma checked the angle of the rope. "When I give 2 notes, back the horse. Slow it first. Match my hand. And if the ferry drops, you hold until 3 notes. If you are still on the water, you hold until 3 notes." Duncan's jaw tightened. Yes, the word was not surrender. It was trust chosen under cost. Alma laid her hand over his for 1 second. He closed his fingers around hers, firm and brief, then released before urgency could turn the touch into anything else. She stepped back toward the landing. Asa dragged the skiff down from its mooring and held the bow against the current. "Can it reach them?" he asked. "If Duncan arrests the swing." The woman on the ferry cried out as the wagon wheel slipped again. Bale's worker finally freed one horse's breast strap. The second horse stumbled against the rail. Bale shoved past him, not toward the passengers, but toward the wagon bed. He pulled one crate farther from the open edge and ordered his men to secure it. "Leave the iron," Alma shouted. "Move the people. That crate is county property. Then stop trying to drown it with witnesses." Bale reached for the brake. The platform lurched. The main cable groaned overhead, and the cut emergency line opened another inch beneath the pitch. White witness cord slid toward the wound. One strand broke with a crack like a pistol report. The crowd flinched. Duncan did not move. He waited for Alma. The ferry stern swung broadside. Water struck the platform rail and climbed over the deck. The boy screamed. The woman wrapped both arms around him. Alma planted her boots at the edge of the landing, lifted the alder whistle, and watched the line angle close on the point she needed. The emergency restraint split through its last holding fibers. The broken end whipped downstream. Alma blew 2 sharp notes. The bay went backward at the second note. Duncan kept 1 turn of rope around the saddle horn and gave the horse just enough rein to find its footing. The stock line came alive through the south anchor ring, drew tight across the flooded bank, and caught the ferry's downstream swing before the platform could turn fully broadside. The force struck Duncan's right hand first. Wet rope tore across the glove, burned through leather, and drove heat into his palm. He did not lock the line. Alma had told him not to. "Slow," she shouted. Duncan backed the bay 1 measured step. The ferry stern lifted against the new angle. Water still broke over the lower rail, but the platform stopped turning. Partial answer. Not safety. The wagon shifted again and 1 rear wheel climbed the warped plank beneath it. "Hold!" Alma blew 1 note. Duncan stopped the horse. The line vibrated through his right forearm. Every muscle in his body wanted to take more tension before the river could steal another yard. He held where she had placed him. Alma shoved the skiff into the current. Asa steadied the stern until she signaled release, then let the river carry her toward the upstream side of the ferry. The boy's mother had both arms around him. The older man braced the injured driver beneath his sound shoulder. One of Bale's workers had freed the first horse from its breast strap, but the second remained trapped by wet traces and the weight of the wagon. "The boy first," Alma called. Bale stepped across the deck. "Take the crate. It is county property. The child first. The iron will wash away. Then the county can recover iron after the living are ashore." She caught the platform rail and brought the skiff alongside. The current struck her broadside, but the ferry's hull broke enough force for her to hold position with 1 oar. The mother lowered the boy toward her. He kicked once in panic. Alma caught him beneath the arms and set him on the floor of the skiff. "Hold the center brace. Do not stand." "Mama, she comes next." Alma blew 1 note. Duncan held. Price and Asa took the skiff's shoreline and drew only when Alma raised her hand. The boat crossed under the ferry's lee, then slipped into open current for the final stretch. Alma corrected with 2 short strokes. Asa caught the bow when it struck mud. The boy scrambled toward shore. "Stay low," Alma ordered until both feet were on land. Then she turned the skiff back. The mother came next. The older man followed on the 3rd trip. Each time Duncan took or held tension only at the whistle. His right palm burned deeper. The torn glove darkened with rain and blood, but the rope still moved under control. On the 4th trip, the ferry lurched. The wagon team screamed. 1 wheel dropped off the warped plank and struck the downstream rail. The platform dipped hard enough to throw Alma against the skiff's side. Her hip hit wood. Pain flashed through her and spread along her forearm, where the gunwale caught her. Duncan rose in the saddle before discipline stopped him. He saw Alma brace, recover the oar, and turn the skiff back toward the ferry. He stayed. The injured driver had gone pale. "Him now," Alma said. One of Bale's workers helped lower him. Bale seized the skiff's short bowline. "Take 1 crate with you." Alma met his gaze. "Release it. Those pieces belong to the county. So does this crossing, and you ignored its closure. They will use the iron against me." The truth escaped before he could shape it. Price heard. So did the men on shore. Bale tightened his grip. Alma drew the river knife from her belt and cut the short line between his fist and the skiff. The current took her at once. She rowed the injured driver ashore, while Bale stood holding a useless length of rope. On the ferry, the torn oilcloth snapped in the wind. The stenciled crate remained visible beneath the feed sacks. No one could claim it had appeared after the rescue. The 5th trip carried Bale's first worker. The man climbed into the skiff without waiting for Bale's permission. "I am done taking orders from a man who leaves children behind iron," he said. Bale lunged toward him, but the shifting deck forced him back against the wagon. The second worker cut the final trace. 1 horse stumbled free and reached the upstream rail. The other kicked through a loose board, then pulled itself clear when the harness dropped. Alma took the second worker on the next trip and returned alone for the team. She climbed onto the platform, gathered the loose reins, and turned both horses toward the upstream edge. "When the ferry comes within reach of the lower gravel, let them jump one at a time," she called to Price. The first horse plunged, swam 3 yards, and found footing. Men caught the reins. The second followed. With the team gone, the platform rose several inches. The wagon remained heavy, but the ferry answered the anchor rope more cleanly. Bale saw the change. He left the wagon and climbed over the south rail when the platform swung near enough to the flooded bank. Water reached his thighs. He fought through it toward Duncan's position. Price shouted from below, "Stop him!" Duncan did not release the line. He could not. Bale reached the bank, slipped once, then saw where the stock rope passed over a low stone before running to the saddle horn. His hand went inside his coat. The knife flashed beneath lightning. Price had already sent one of the cleared witnesses toward Alder Reach when Bale forced the ferry from shore, with orders to summon the deputy and any available county officer. The rider returned now at the head of the road with a deputy sheriff behind him. Both men saw Bale raise the blade. "Do not cut that rope," Price shouted. "Mrs. Keane is still on the water." Bale struck the line. Outer fibers parted. The rope jumped against Duncan's burned palm. Pain shot through his hand and up his forearm. He caught the line with his left and wrapped it once across his forearm, without changing the horse's position. Bale lifted the knife again. Price and 2 Alder Reach men reached him first. They drove him into the mud and tore the blade from his hand. The deputy dismounted within yards of them. He saw the fresh cut in the stock rope, Bale beneath 3 men, and Alma still standing on the ferry platform. "Who witnessed the first stroke?" he asked. "All 3 of us," Price said. "And Mrs. Keane remained aboard." The deputy looked toward the river. "Hold him." There was no need for a speech. The act had witnesses. Alma moved to the wagon. The rear wheel had jammed against the rail. She used a pry bar from the ferry deck to shift the wheel enough for the platform to settle. The oilcloth tore farther, exposing 2 county-marked crates beneath the feed sacks. One lid had worked loose but had not opened. "Do not touch them," Price called. "They stay as found until the platform is secured." Alma nodded. Evidence could wait. The river could not. She returned to the skiff. The main cable groaned overhead. The backup restraint was gone now, its broken downstream end whipping against brush below the bank while the anchored end hung slack beside the white witness cords. It would never hold again. Duncan remained on the bay, right hand failing, left forearm locked around the rope. Alma blew one note. "Hold." He held. She rowed out from the platform and let the current carry her toward the near bank. Halfway across, a branch struck the skiff's bow. The boat spun. Alma drove 1 oar deep and nearly lost it when pain seized her bruised forearm. Duncan's horse shifted under him. He did not move toward the water. He kept the anchor angle steady, giving her the quiet strip of current she had created for herself. Alma corrected the bow and crossed the final yards. Asa caught the skiff. Her injured hip folded when she stepped into the mud, but she remained upright. Duncan dismounted with difficulty. He stopped an arm's length away. His right glove hung torn, and the wrap of rope had left a dark burn across his palm. He did not take her because fear told him to. He waited. Alma closed the distance. She put both arms around him and pressed her face into his wet coat. Duncan held her first with his left arm. When she tightened the embrace, he brought the injured right arm around her without gripping. The river still roared. Bale still cursed behind them. None of it entered the choice between their bodies. Alma lifted her face and kissed Duncan. Not the brief question from the barn. This kiss carried the weight of every instruction he had followed, every fear he had refused to make her burden, every moment he had protected without taking command from her. Duncan answered with the same restraint that had made the kiss possible. He did not deepen it until she did. When they parted, rain ran between their foreheads. "I held where you put me," he said. Alma touched his cheek. "That is why I came back to you." Only after every traveler and both horses stood safe did Price allow the ferry to be drawn against the lower gravel. Under the deputy's eye, Asa opened 1 county-marked crate. Inside lay unused round-shouldered pins, retaining plates and drum fittings packed in grease and straw. Price entered each item in his notebook before anyone moved it. The second crate remained closed. The deputy placed both under guard. Men recovered the 2 broken ends of the old backup line and tied them separately for evidence. The sealed fiber and pitch sample from Part 8 remained in Price's document case. Nothing changed hands without a name attached. Bail was taken to Alderreach under guard. Lottie remained safe at Lantern Creek with Evan's sister throughout the day. Near dusk, Justice Elias Ward arrived from the Pomeroy Road after the deputy's messenger reached him at midday. He surveyed the damaged crossing, the secured crates, the severed rescue rope, and the broken backup line. He did not declare guilt beside the river. "The sworn examination will begin tomorrow morning in Alderreach," he said. Then he faced Alma. "Mrs. Keane, your account will be taken first." By sunrise, Samuel Price had already ridden the road between Lantern Creek and Alderreach twice. The storm had stripped branches from the cottonwoods and flooded one shallow crossing, but the wagon route remained passable if taken slowly. Only after Price gave his word did Evan's sister bring Lottie into the settlement beneath a covered wagon hood. Alma waited outside the church meeting room, with one hand braced against the hitching rail. Her bruised hip had stiffened overnight. The dark mark along her forearm showed beneath the cuff when she reached for her daughter. Lottie came to her without hesitation, warm, sleepy, and indignant at the early journey. Alma held her close until the child found the alder whistle beneath her mother's collar and tugged at the cord. Duncan stood several feet away with his right hand, wrapped from palm to forearm. He had tried to fasten his coat one-handed and failed at the lower button. Alma noticed. She did not fix it for him yet. Justice Elias Ward opened the preliminary examination after the church bell marked 8. No crowd filled the room. Price allowed only named witnesses, the postmaster, the deputy sheriff, and 2 men who had seen Bale strike the rescue rope. Bale sat under guard near the back wall. Mud still marked his boots from the riverbank. Ward placed no gavel on the table and made no speech about guilt. He opened his notebook, looked at Alma, and said, "Tell me the first fact you can prove." Alma began with the pin. She described finding it below the ferry drum after Thomas died, wrapping it in linen, keeping it inside her valise, allowing Duncan and Asa to examine it only in her presence, and carrying it to Pomeroy on May 25th. Ward read aloud the evidence register entry, showing that the sheared pin remained under his seal. It had not returned to Alderreach. It had not passed through Alma's hands again. Asa Bell testified next. Ward placed the pin, still wrapped and sealed, on the table but did not break custody. Asa relied on the notes he had made during his earlier examination. The neck was narrowed by a fine file, he said. Pitch was pressed into the groove. The work weakened the pin before river rust formed over it. Ward asked, "Can you say who held the file?" "No." "Can you say whether ordinary wear made that groove?" "No ordinary wear I have seen makes straight tool marks." Asa produced his account book and identified the cash sale of one narrow, fine-cut file to Phineas Bale 6 weeks before Thomas died. "Did he tell you why he wanted it?" "Private work. He told me not to put it under the ferry account." Bale leaned forward. "A file is not a confession." Ward did not turn toward him. "No one has called it one." Samuel Price followed. He placed the local ferry maintenance ledger, the local receipt record, and his certified abstract from the Pomeroy County records on the table as separate items. The original county delivery record remained with the county clerk. The local receipt showed Bale's signature for 4 approved round-shouldered pins and related fittings delivered in August of 1886. The maintenance ledger showed Thomas's warnings. Ward asked Price to read only the final entry. Price did. "Ordered by lessee to remain open for late freight. Replacement required." Then the word beneath it. "Continue." Price testified that he had closed the crossing after comparing the local records with the certified county abstract. He also produced the folded paper packet containing the tiny fiber and pitch sample removed on May 23rd. The signatures of Price and Asa still crossed the fold. The 2 broken ends of the backup line lay outside beneath guard because the wet rope was too long and dirty for the meeting room. Price described the white witness cords that had marked the damaged section before the line snapped. Was the line removed after the damage was found? Ward asked. No, Mrs. Keane advised that removing it without replacement rigging could shift the platform. We left it attached, marked it out of service, and kept the ferry closed. How did it later take strain? Bale released the brake with a loaded wagon aboard. The platform slewed. Side force transferred to the emergency restraint. And then, the weakened section opened and broke. The rescued mother spoke next. She held her son beside her. Her statement was short. Bale had insisted the ferry could cross. Price had ordered it unloaded. Bale released the brake. Alma took the child first. Bale demanded she carry a crate before the injured driver. Did Mrs. Keane agree? Ward asked. No. She cut the skiff line from his hand and took the driver. The deputy sheriff then described arriving, while Bale raised a knife over Duncan's stock rope. Price warned him Mrs. Keane was still on the water. Bale struck the rope anyway. The two witnesses confirmed the same act. Ward asked whether the county-marked crates had been visible before Bale reached shore. Both men said yes. Asa testified that one crate had been opened only after every traveler, and both horses were safe. The unused pins inside matched the round-shouldered pattern described in the delivery records. Ward summarized the remaining statements, rather than making each person repeat the storm. Bale's workers admitted moving county-marked crates from the tool shed to the abandoned road shed before the fire. One stated that Bale ordered the wagon taken to the ferry when he learned Price meant to inspect the north shed. Bale denied filing the pin, denied ordering the fire, and claimed the hardware had been withheld because it did not fit. Ward asked why no return had been recorded and why the fittings remained packed in grease and straw inside county-marked crates. Bale gave no answer that matched the records. Duncan testified last. He kept his bandaged hand against his coat. Who directed the rescue? Ward asked. Mrs. Keane. Did you alter her instructions? No. Why? She understood the river and the platform better than I did. What did you do after Bale cut the rope? Held the line. Duncan did not mention the burn, the strain, or the fear that had nearly pulled him from the saddle. He gave Alma's authority back to her in the same plain form she had given it to him. Ward closed his notebook. This examination does not decide final guilt. It establishes sworn testimony, preserves the exhibits, and determines whether detention and further proceedings are justified. He ordered Bale transferred to Pomeroy under the deputy's custody. Price's safety closure remained in force. The crates, broken line, fiber sample, local ledgers, and witness statements would travel under named custody. Before ending, Ward looked toward Alma. The record concerning Thomas Keane will be submitted with these findings to the county commissioners and clerk. Alma's hand tightened on the chair back. She did not thank him yet. Truth still had one more office to cross. 6 days later, the commissioners met in Pomeroy. They ratified Price's emergency closure, revoked Bale's lease, ordered a full accounting of county, equipment, and toll collections, and directed the clerk to append a formal finding to Thomas Keane's ferry record. Alma stood at the clerk's counter while he entered the words, "Reported unsafe equipment, ordered by lessee to continue operation. Failure not attributed to intoxication or neglect." Her hand began to shake only after she reached the final line. She turned and placed Lottie in Duncan's left arm. He accepted the child without asking whether Alma was all right. He simply made room for her to stand without holding anything. The commissioners then offered Alma temporary paid responsibility for the crossing during reconstruction. She read the written authority before answering. It gave her the right to close the ferry, required a second inspector before reopening after high water, established posted weight limits, and prevented any future lessee from overruling a safety closure. The inspection schedule, she asked. Yours to set within county requirements, one commissioner said. And if Price closes the river, it remains closed until both of you agree it is safe. Alma signed. 2 days later, June 12th, the bruises still ached when she walked from the house to Lantern Creek's barn. Duncan stood beside the workbench, trying to buckle a halter with his left hand. His right remained wrapped. Alma took the leather from him. "Asa told you not to grip." "I am not gripping. You are negotiating with the buckle. It has taken a severe position. She fastened it and set the halter aside. Duncan faced her. You accepted the crossing. Yes, you should. I can rent a room in Alder Reach when the road dries. Yes. My wages will support Lottie. Yes. Thomas's name is corrected. Duncan's voice lowered. Yes. Alma took the alder whistle from her pocket. I no longer need your barn, your room, or your pay to survive. No. He did not pretend the truth did not hurt. He let it stand between them, clean and necessary. Alma, I love you. His bandaged hand remained at his side. But I will not make shelter the price of staying. I will not ask you to choose me because leaving is difficult. Alma placed the whistle in his uninjured palm. I can leave now. His fingers closed gently around the alder wood. I know, that is why my answer belongs to me. She raised her hand to his cheek. I love you too. Duncan's breath deepened. Are you certain? I am certain I want a life that remains mine while I share it with you. She drew him closer by the front of his coat. The kiss was deliberate, warm, and unhurried. Duncan held her with his left arm, protecting the injured right, and waited until she pressed nearer before answering with more than tenderness. When they parted, the whistle rested between their joined hands. From the porch, Lottie called out in a string of bright sounds that belonged to no word yet. Alma smiled against Duncan's mouth. We should keep dry blankets beneath the seat. By the next spring, 3 dry blankets lived beneath the wagon seat. Alma checked them before every trip, though Duncan had never forgotten them once. One was heavy wool for cold nights. One was small enough to wrap around a child without dragging through mud. The third was sealed in oilskin and tied with a square knot a person could open with numb fingers. April rain had returned to Garfield County, but the crossing no longer depended on hope, patched iron, or one man's appetite for tolls. New round-shouldered pins held the drum fittings. Fresh cable ran through inspected guides. A second restraint line, properly rated and plainly marked, waited upstream. Beside the landing stood a painted board listing weight limits, closure signals, and the names of the 2 people required to inspect the machinery after high water. Samuel Price's name appeared beneath Alma's. Either one could close the ferry. No lessee could order it opened again until both agreed. Alma walked the platform with a ledger tucked beneath one arm, while Lottie toddled along the bank beside Duncan. At 20 months, the child had discovered speed before balance. She made 4 determined steps toward the water, caught her boot on a stone, and grabbed Duncan's trouser leg before she fell. Up, she ordered. Duncan bent and lifted her with his left arm. The rope-burn scar across his right palm had faded to a pale ridge, but cold mornings still made him flex the hand before gripping a rein. Alma noticed because she always noticed. Her own hip had stopped aching before their October wedding, and the bruise along her forearm had long since disappeared. Neither scar nor memory was hidden. Neither governed them. Drum housing is sound, Alma called. Price leaned over the rail to inspect the pin shoulder. Cable tension, even. West approach still needs gravel before the next loaded freight wagon. I sent the request to Pomeroy. Send it again. Price glanced up. You think the first one will vanish? I think paper rests easily beneath coffee cups. Price smiled and entered the note in his book. Thomas's corrected record remained with the county clerk in Pomeroy. Alma had read it enough times to know every line, but she did not carry a copy against her heart or turn the finding into a shrine. Thomas had warned them. Bail had ordered him to continue. The county had entered the truth. That was what the record could do. It could not return him. It could keep the lie from replacing him. Bale's ferry lease was gone. Formal proceedings and repayment claims had continued through winter, slower and less dramatic than rumor wanted. Merchants who once depended on his freight favors had found other carriers. Men who feared losing work had begun speaking once. His hand no longer held every road. No crowd had transformed overnight. Some people still watched Alma too long. Others accepted her authority only after the river obeyed her more reliably than it had obeyed Bale. She no longer needed their admiration. She required only that they follow the posted limits. Duncan carried Lottie onto the platform while Alma tested the brake release. The child pointed toward the water. Boat, ferry, Alma corrected. Boat, Lottie insisted. Duncan studied the platform as if the matter required serious thought. It floats. So does a log. Lottie might call that a boat, too. The child nodded, satisfied that she had gained an ally. Alma released the brake enough to move the platform 1 yard, then stopped it. The drum answered with a smooth turn. No false scrape, no hidden hitch beneath the iron. She placed her palm against the housing and felt the vibration pass through the metal. Thomas had taught her to listen that way. Noise could be masked. Motion was harder to deceive. Sound, she said. Price signed his line. Alma signed hers beneath it. Duncan did not praise work that had long since become publicly hers. He asked only, "Ready to go home?" Alma looked across Alder Reach. The tool shed had been rebuilt farther from the bank with 2 keys held by separate men. Medicine and mail schedules were posted beside the general store. Asa Bell had installed an emergency bell at the secondary landing, though Lottie called it Big Noise and preferred the alder whistle. A merchant who once challenged Alma's closures now checked the painted weightboard before loading his wagon. He did not apologize. He obeyed. It was enough. "Ready," Alma said. Lantern Creek Ranch had not grown grander during the year. The barn roof had been repaired. The east wall of the house had been sealed against wind. The nursery door remained open. Ruth's yellow curtains had been washed and rehung, and her photographs still rested on the shelf beside the wooden horse Duncan repaired with a new wheel. Alma had never turned the picture face down. Lottie pointed to it some mornings and said, "Ruth," because Duncan had taught her the name. Thomas's alder whistle hung from a peg near the nursery door when Alma was not carrying it. The dead were not rivals in that house. They were part of the truth the living refused to erase. Duncan set Lottie down in the hall. She hurried toward the nursery, lost 1 shoe, and kept going. Alma picked up the abandoned shoe. "Your daughter believes footwear is optional." Duncan leaned against the doorframe. "She learned that from a woman who crossed a washed road with mud over one boot. I kept both boots. By stubbornness, by skill. Both then. They had married in October after a summer and early autumn that belonged to no crisis." Alma continued working the crossing. Duncan continued running Lantern Creek. Some evenings she stayed in Alder Reach after a late inspection. Some mornings he brought Lottie to the ferry with breakfast wrapped in cloth. He never asked where loyalty ended and obedience began. Alma no longer mistook restraint for distance. On the nursery bed, Lottie found the alder whistle and held it up. One note," Alma said. "Not indoors." Lottie placed it against her lips and considered rebellion. Duncan crossed the room and kissed Alma's temple as he passed. The affection was easy now, not careless, earned enough to become ordinary. Alma caught the front of his coat before he moved away. "That was too brief. I was preserving your authority. My authority can survive a proper kiss." She drew him back. Duncan smiled against her mouth, then kissed her with the steady warmth of a man no longer afraid that happiness invited loss simply by being named. Lottie made an impatient sound from the bed. Alma released him. "We have been dismissed by the highest authority in the house. Do not encourage her. Too late." Rain began before supper and continued into the following afternoon. The family had gone to Alder Reach for flour, lamp oil, and a packet from Pomeroy. On the road home, water darkened the ruts but had not yet reached the low ground. Lottie sat between them beneath a lap robe, solemn from missing her midday sleep. The alder whistle hung from a cord around Alma's neck. Ahead, where cottonwoods leaned over the road, a cart stood crooked beside the ditch. One wheel had split at the hub. A woman in a soaked bonnet held a small child beneath her shawl while trying to drag a trunk away from the runoff. Duncan slowed the team. He did not turn the wagon. He looked at Alma. The choice passed between them without weight. Alma lifted the whistle and sounded one clear note. Lottie sat upright. "Stop," she said. Alma placed her hand over Duncan's on the reins. "Stop the wagon." He brought the team to a halt. Before climbing down, he bent and kissed Alma's temple. She caught his sleeve, pulled him back, and kissed him fully enough to make the stranded woman glance away with the beginning of a tired smile. Then Alma reached beneath the seat and drew out the oilskin bundle. The square knot opened at the first pull. "I have dry blankets," she called. The woman tightened her hold on the child. "We cannot pay." Alma stepped into the rain with the oilskin spread over one arm. Rain is not a debt. Behind her, Duncan turned the wagon across the rain-dark road. Lottie stood between the seats with one hand braced on the rail and sounded the alder whistle once, as Alma opened the dry covering wide enough for another mother and child.